and welcome back to another biochemistry episode. Today we're talking about the holy grail in physiology, which is the action potential. This is a sudden and fast change of the resting membrane potential. First, we have to clarify that only some cell types can generate an action potential. So predominantly we're talking about muscle cells and neurons. They've got a so-called resting membrane potential. So inside of a cell we have fewer positive ions than outside. Therefore we have an ion gradient. This gradient is maintained by the sodium-potassium ATPase. ATPase means that it uses ATP to pump 3 sodiums out of the cell and 2 potassium ions into the cell. But this is not a static system. We've got a constant flow of ions as cell membranes are permeable to potassium ions. The resting membrane potential of a neuron is usually around minus 75 millivolts. An action potential can be divided into different phases, and here I say that we have 3, but you can also say that there are 4. Some people are even talking about 5 phases, so it's just important that you get the principle. We've got a depolarization, a repolarization, and a hyperpolarization. Before this can happen, we need a stimulus. The stimulus can be a neurotransmitter when we're talking about neurons, or a chemical signal when we're talking about muscle cells. There's a specific threshold potential, which is shown in a graphic as a gray dashed line. And this threshold potential has to be overcome in order to provoke an action potential. If the threshold is overstepped, the cell can start to depolarize. First and most important here are the voltage-gated sodium channels. They open and sodium streams following its chemical gradient into the cell. So now the cell gets more positive. The channels then close again and the potassium channels open. Now the membrane potential is plus 30 millivolts. Now the potassium streams out of the cells again, and thereby we've got the membrane potential back. But before we really go back to the membrane resting potential, we get into a phase where it's slightly more negative because the potassium channels remain open for a bit longer. These channels are essential for the type of action potential we have. So here you can see on the left side the action potential of a neuron, while on the right side we have the action potential of a heart cell. As you can see, the neurons take about 1 to 2 milliseconds to generate an action potential, which can last up to 300 milliseconds in heart cells. And here again the sodium-potassium ATPase can re-establish the resting membrane potential. After an action potential, there follows a refractory period, where the cell cannot undergo an action potential again. We've got an absolute and a relative period. As the name suggests, in the absolute refractory period, no action potential can be induced, indifferent of the stimulus. This is what you see here. While we're in the red phase, no action potential can be generated, and this doesn't, if the stimulus is very strong, this doesn't change anything. In the relative refractory period, however, it's harder to achieve the threshold potential, and the action potential that you get is not as strong. In general, action potentials are all or nothing signals. So as soon as you overstep the threshold, there's a stereotypical response. This refractory period is essential, especially in our hearts, and is made feasible by voltage-gated sodium channels. And you see them here. So they're hexamers, so this means that we've got 6 transmembrane domains and we've got 4 homologous domains. And in the cartoon, which is, I guess, easier to understand, you see that there are 3 kind of phases in which a sodium channel can be, so either deactivated and closed, activated and open, or inactivated and closed. And here's a plug, and as soon as the cell has undergone undergone an action potential, this plug closes the channel, and this is what we call the refractory period. This was a brief overview about action potentials. They're essential as they enable communication and make our hearts beat. But of course, there are different mechanisms, so this was just a brief introduction. Don't forget to subscribe. I hope you enjoyed this video and see you in the next one.